Brotherhood, multiplication, restoration. We are Sin Network. We're a family, planting churches together. Journey with us as we hear from church planters all across North America, discovering what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone.
Today, John Onwuchekwa, Ryan McCammack, and I talk about leadership development in pastoring and church planting.
What's up? How you guys doing?
Good.
Man, I was thinking the other day, just on the passage in Matthew 9:35-38, when Jesus was talking about that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest for more laborers, right? And since the time I planted Blueprint, we've always been like we want to be an answer to that prayer. We want to see more laborers. But one of the challenges that I've constantly ran into, and what I see happening across the country, is where are the leaders? Where are the laborers? Where are the people who can come alongside and actually do it? There's a plethora of reasons. But one of the things that I really recognize is that a lot of times we're always kind of waiting for someone outside to kind of parachute in and be kind of this already made leader. But the idea of raising up leaders from within is kind of like a foreign concept. Like no one ever thinks about looking at their pew to see kind of the next generation of laborers. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you think, first of all, that's the case?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with raising up leaders is that it's not an instant process. Yeah. I mean, even if you look at the Gospels and Jesus, he's spending 3 years with these guys, and one of them turns out to be a complete flop, and the rest of them are a mess initially. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the biggest things, that we have to be committed to the time that it takes to raise up leaders and not get overwhelmed with expectations that say, man, you got to plan another one this fast, or send somebody out this fast, and say, man, who has the Lord entrusted us, and how are we trying to spend a sufficient time with them to try to raise them up?
Yeah, yeah. Or not even starting to buy into the fact that success means the person that I spend this time with, that we send them out.
That's right, yeah.
That success could mean we spend 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years, we find out, oh no, it's not a good thing to send you out.
Yeah.
And but that to us kind of feels like 3 wasted years when it's not, because it's 3 years that is invested in somebody, and you save a group of folks, a whole world of hurt by not letting them go. And
That's
so
right.
It does slow down our timetable and stats, and being able to say we've sent off this many church planters by this time. But
right.
Yeah.
Because one of the things has always been, I wanted to be a last generation has to leave the urban context for sound discipleship. And that was something that has constantly driven me. But then as I started looking at where are the leaders? How can we identify the leaders? That has always been a challenge, of finding guys, already made guys, guys that are like that. What do you think we need to do to reorient? You talk about patience, it's time wasted. Do we need to kind of have a different perspective? What do we need to do, in thinking about raising up laborers from within?
Yeah. I think that we've got to change our timetables, right? Yeah. So I think that, 10 years ago when we set out to plant, it seemed like there was a structure that was already in place to raise up church planters. Yeah. And that structure was, all right, let's get a guy who's already done schooling, has worked in a church, has done all this stuff, and we're going to give this guy 12 months, and we're going to do the best we can with 12 months, and we're going to send them out, right? We've got to get guys in and get out. But that doesn't take into account the struggles, challenges that we face, right? And so it's I think that we do have to step back and say, that is a framework, and one that worked and did good for some time for a context, but specifically for where we are right now, that paradigm may not be the best plug and play for us. And so we just got to step back and say, what do we need to raise up these guys? And
Yeah, I think you just have to, part of that going into that is that you have to have a clear vision for discipling your people.
Right.
Like, it's part of an overall strategy where, man, if disciple making is what your church does, you got to have a vision for when that guy who just came to know the Lord walks in the door, or somebody that has no background in the church whatsoever, and say, how can I help them fulfill what God is calling them to be? And for some of them, man, that's just going to be a faithful church member.
Yeah.
For some, that's going to be an international missionary. For some, that's going to be a church planter. For some, that's going to mean serving right there in that church for 25 years as a faithful lay person who puts money in the offering and serves in kids ministry and all those things. But I think just having that concept of like, man, we want to multiply at every level,
Right.
and that will give us the base to actually be able to send some out. Like John said, not every guy's going to go out, and that's okay. That's part of the Lord's plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that go through my mind when you said that. It's something that constantly is like on repeat. Every covenant member is either a bivocational church planter or a bivocational church planting team member, right? Meaning that instead of like trying to find the one or two faithful people and spending on like, how do we create a system to discipling all of our people and allowing God to kind of discern and decide like how that is being fleshed out, whether it's international, and all that. But then the other thing you talked about was the timing of it. I think that that's a critical thing. A lot of times when I speak, I tell people always ask like, well, how did you get a church up and going and all that? And I always say, see, a lot of times we think that we planted Blueprint Church in 2010 because that's when we on the name, but really the church was planted in 2001, 2002, when the first people moved into our home and discipled and trained. And it was like this long process, and so people think, oh, there's already made leaders that just come. No, there was years of time to go. But talking about kind of this year conversation, Paul would go into a place is seemingly, we don't know all the back, but like he was at Thessalonica for a few weeks and he would just come like, I had to appoint elders, and like, how much of this time is on us and how much of this time is really like...
Paul also did something. Paul raised the dead. Paul healed people with a shadow.
You don't do that?
No, I don't. So Paul didn't leave the instructions on how to do that. So
if we could get that curriculum, I think we would have some real help. Elders in 3 weeks.
Elders in 3 weeks.
So it is but there was a I do think that there was an aspect of like there was a volatile and hostile nature to Christianity that we all know, like, man, tragedy and persecution tends to cement a commitment and learning and growth in a way that prosperity oftentimes does not, right? Tragedy and persecution can kind of speed it up. So there's sometimes I look and say, maybe the fact that people were getting their heads chopped off actually served to speed things up in a way that, right now, I live on the west side of town and nobody's getting their head chopped off for the gospel. And so,
how much time do you need?
Right.
How much time is it? I mean, is there a good number? Is there a rule of thumb in there?
Yeah, I think it's hard to put a number on it because it depends on where the guy is when he comes to you and what he needs to learn. I mean, is there theological training? Because we don't want to send somebody out that can't handle the word or that can't shepherd people well. Yeah. Is there contextual training? Are they coming from a different environment that where they're planting or where they're going doesn't make sense? So I think you've got to take all of those things into account and just have an open hand and say, Lord, what are you doing? I think there's a real tension there, but between training a guy forever and just trusting the Lord on some of those things and sending out undertrained guys. Yeah. And we have to. There's a before the Lordness, I think, in local churches where we have to say, Lord, we're as best as we can discerning your will with this particular fellow right now. Yeah.
How much of that did you guys get? Like, because I think about my journey. Yeah. Right, and one of the reasons why I want to be the last generation to have to leave the urban context without sound with the sound discipleship is because literally I got saved in 1996 or 1995. I got saved 96. Little months later, I was at the University of North Texas. I couldn't tell you stories about David and Goliath, Samson and Delilah. By the end of 1996, I was already leading the ministry. Right. is no way in the world I would appoint or put anybody over leading a ministry. But I was a guy with charisma. I was a guy that had some, platform at the school, and I loved the Lord. I look back at the stuff that I was doing, I'm like, dog, I got to repent for some of the stuff that I was teaching. But is it more of our problem with releasing and not allowing people to make mistakes, or is you think God is like, don't let them defame my name? Like, which one do you think it's more?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because Paul is going to caution the church about, don't lay hands on somebody too quickly, right? Don't appoint a guy when he's like too young or a recent convert, right? Yeah, it's funny that Paul would say, you appoint a recent convert and he may get trapped up in the snare and the conceit. So I do think that it's a bit of both. That that one we do want to wait.
So
I think you have to think about a little bit like, what's your personality? Yeah. Like, are you more prone to be free-wielding, then maybe you need to exercise a little bit of caution.
Yeah.
Are you more prone to be extra careful, extra controlling?
Yeah.
Then probably you need to swing this way. And that's why you have, Lord willing, in healthy churches, you have teams of pastors that are speaking into it in different ways.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No. I mean, as you said that, I just think to the 10 years that me and Hadi spent. And Hadi tended to be more, all right, let's go.
Right.
And I was more like, let's pump the brakes.
You're the brakes, he's the gas.
Yeah. But I do think that it's that tension, those hard convos, the fights, the frustrations that in the course of the past 10 years, I think, God used that to balance it out. And I do think that we made wise decisions as a church through that time because we had both sides. So I do think that's a good word.
Multiplication is painful. I mean, it just hurts like at every level because you do have that tension among leaders. You have to have difficult conversations with the person that you're trying to train up for whatever role, whether it's a group leader or a ministry director or sending them out. Like, I think the phrase growing pains like applies to the church as well.
And I'm trying to wrestle because most people, I don't all the different learnings, audio, but most people would say, for the sake of argument and try to make my argument work, most people would say that they probably learn better by doing. Like, I don't know how true and how accurate that is. I don't have any stats to back it up. So what are our ways that you can create controlled environments that get people to do? Because what I see is like, okay, go to seminary for 3 to 4 years. You got to get a THM or MDiv, and before you can be able to faithfully teach the word. And so it's like, so how do we get the people doing in a way that is but let's
So I don't think that we have to treat the process of preparing people linearly and consecutively.
Okay.
I think it's best if you do it concurrently.
Okay.
All at the same time. So yes, go and get theologically trained. If that's school, if that's a program, if it's you and your pastor sitting, reading books and starting to work through them and to write your thoughts and to get things clear. But as you do that, take all of the stuff that you learn and teach, right? I want you in my church teaching. I want you leading as you get all this stuff so that you see that as you get this stuff, like, you're not meant to be a cul-de-sac. It's not meant to terminate in you, nor do you have to wait until you walk across the stage, shake a hand, and get a degree conferred on you before you go out and teach God's word. But I think that there is an aspect of how do we take all these things and do that at the same time? You get trained while you teach, while you serve, and I think it's that conglomerate of stuff that really helps to shape folks. I think back to my story.
Before you get the pillars? What would you say those pillars are? Like, what are those things that you need to making sure, like you said, concurrently that are working together? I mean, if you were to give, we have
three. So there's three things that I think in mind is we have, three young guys, 23 to 25, who all have a desire to pastor one day. As I've seen the roadblocks of where things messed up, there's three things that I'm trying to do all with them at the same time. I want them to be theologically sound, right? I want them to be sharp and to be a Tom used to say, I want them to be able to palm their Bible like they do with basketball. I want them to know it and to be sharp, to be able to encourage folks with sound teaching and to refute those that contradict it. So that I also want them to be pastorally tested, right? So as they're getting trained, I want them to be able to know how to use God's word, both in the way that they teach, right? Where they take one passage of text and try to apply it to all of God's people, and in the way that they counsel, where they take all of God's word and apply it to one person. So I want them to have those things, and I want them to see that fleshed out in real life personally as they talk with folks and live with folks. And then the third thing is one that I don't think a lot of folks talk about is I want them to be financially free, right? So I don't want to do those first two in a way that after they're done with those first two, it constrains them and put them in a place where they'd be bad stewards for their family unless they found a place that could help them take care of their family. So as we go about all of that, I want them to learn about money and how the world works, right? Not so that they'll love it, but so that they won't ignorantly be used by it, but they can use it as a tool. I want them to be free. So as they go out. So those are the three things that I'm trying to do at the same time.
You got a 3-point sermon?
Well, we use those C's.
As I close,
right. Is it a poem or something you can work in? A hymn? We use kind of a similar framework, those three C's: competency, character, and conviction. And I guess the one that is implicit in what John is talking about there is the character aspect of man, that might be top shelf. You have got to have a godly person that reads their Bible, that prays, that loves people and, shepherds their family, all of those just basic Christian disciplines. We don't serve the church if we send out people that aren't reproducing themselves. And the first thing that we want to reproduce is people that walk with the Lord. So, and then I would echo the other one's conviction. They need to know what they believe in. The competency, it's kind of the same as pastoral skill. They have to show themselves faithful in these. You don't want to send out a novice.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's good. You guys are so pastoral.
Oh, well.
I love you guys.
Can we pray for you right now?
You guys are so pastoral. Because I'm just man, that's good. Because I'm just when I think about I'm coming from an apostolic. Have you reached? Are you out? Can you go out and reach people? And, so I'm looking at it from a evangelistic standpoint, vantage point. And so
says the man that has 6 people in addition to your wife and 6 kids staying in your house at any point in time, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. No, that's what I'm saying. So a pastor, teacher, church planter, apostolic, and tried and true, making sure that there is that ground, that burial ground of doing that. But, because a lot of times people was hey, man, I want to see a church plant in our area or this neighborhood. I guess that's kind of what I'm just let's partner with God at work. Are you already raising up? Because I was going to ask, both of you, would you say that you're preparing church planters or pastors or either or, meaning the idea, because we all recognize there's a slightly different kind of DNA kind of for both, if you look at the APES, a lot of times if you're going, especially from scratch in a sense, you need that kind of apostolic, evangelistic bent, but then you also later you need that shepherd teacher, would you guys say in your residency or how?
Yes. Okay. So to your point, yes. And so here's what my bent is I'm a pastor. We're in year 4 of our church right now. And those first 3 years, it feels like I'm writing with my offhand. It's not enjoyable. All the stuff that church planters love and thrive, it's so hard. But there's a guy that's on our team, Richard, who is the man, he's the guy that's laying all of that groundwork. And so I think as a team comes, right, what we do when we're trying to bring in this team of guys and to say, all right, how has God made you? And what's the best way to prepare you right now? So right now in our guy 3, we've got one guy that looks like he's got that same like heart. And so he's been paired up with Richard. And there's stuff that we all do, and then there's stuff that he's already on the ground trying to do. There's another guy that may have a bent to be more pastor, less planter, and he's paired up with me. There's stuff that they all do, but then there's stuff that we do. So we try to say, eventually, regardless of what you do, you're going to have to pastor a church. So let's try to prepare guys for that, and then based on their bent, how do we pair them up with somebody else that can help?
Are you planning on sending out in teams, or do you?
Oh no, teams. Yeah. So
I think that's an important, an important concept. It's the idea of teams, and I see so many people dying on the vine
by themselves.
When they go out by themselves, it's them and their wife, and children. They're just out there trying to do it all on their own, and I'm like, oh my goodness,
it's not good for the man to be alone. And I think that. The exegesis may be a little shaky, but I think it applies. So I cannot imagine doing that work on our own. Like I can't fathom. And there's so many guys that do it, and they just carry a burden that I don't think that they have to.
Talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing. Because I'm trying, we're all wrestling through residency stuff and raising up people from within. I love briefly, to hear what you guys are doing, so I can kind of steal it and act like it's mine and take it on my own. But like, what does your residency look like? If you were just to kind of give us the quick bullets on that, what would they be?
So if you kind of use those pillars, I mean, there's all of those things going on. So there's a theological component to it where you're asking guys to read and think through things. There's a pastoral component where it's really informal in many ways, but when you go to the hospital or go to a meeting, you're like, come on. And then you go back and you're debriefing about what happened. Hey, what went well there? What stood out to you? Just having conversations about pastoral ministry.
Are you paying them, not paying them?
Some of both. Like it just depends on where that guy is on the continuum, and then there's just a character component where, at least in our staff meetings, we sit around and we ask generally questions like, hey man, what's your greatest area of temptation right now? How does the gospel speak to that? And trying to train them to be self-feeders and self-promoters in that. So it's pretty informal, but you want, disciples are made by imparting doctrine and life. And so you've got to give them scripture and truth and theology, but you've got to do it in a life-on-life context. So trying to figure out how that works.
So rhythm-wise, if you just like, what are your rhythms? Do you guys meet monthly, weekly?
Yeah, so weekly, and then informally, and then giving them ministry opportunities in the church. I mean, one thing that we say is we don't use people to get ministry done. We use ministry to get people done. In other words, we want to give you this responsibility, because we need to look after the kids. Because we need a worship team. Because we need things set up. But we believe that God wants to do something in you through this. This is God is growing you through leadership in this area. So that's been something that I think our residents have really latched onto.
You was talking earlier about kind of giving more than you actually get and having that mindset.
Are they going to see this or no?
No. Of course not. We'll edit that part.
I appreciate that. That's good.
So that's good. Okay, no, that's good. What about you, Amin?
Ours is much of the same. So our mindset at the front end was, instead of one guy for 1 year, another guy for year 2, and then a third guy for year 3, let's just take 3 guys and commit to them for 3 years and try to do it all with them so that they go through a cohort. So the very first thing I think that we try to do is we try to get our whole church on board so that our church sees that our whole church is playing a part in trying to raise up pastors, and it's not just us, right? So our church is supplementing their schools so that these guys can go for 3 years and come out debt-free. So They got help from the school and then help from our church. So we're trying to pay through that. Theologically and pastorally, we're trying to pair those up. So as they're in school, all of these guys are responsible to co-teach in the life of our church with some other church member. So what we're saying is take the stuff that you're going to learn in school and teach that into our church. And so it takes it from theology just for its sake to, no, I practically want to see how this will flesh out in the life of, Karen or Bob or Kathy. And so I feel like that they get built up in those skills that way. Tuesday mornings, what we do with all of the guys, from 9 a.m. until noon, that's the time where it's my first time studying the text that I'm going to preach that next week. And all three of those guys are in that time. And we study the text together, talk through it, come up with outlines, talk about ways that this specifically needs to be applied to folks in the life of our church. And so again, trying to build up their skills and to help them see that although the sermon is delivered by one person on a Sunday, it really comes as a result of all of the work, some that's done in that room, some as we counsel and all that stuff. And so that stuff, once per month, all of the pastors meet with all of the interns and we have a debrief time where we talk through things like the importance of pastoral presence, right? Just people will forgive a lot of things if you're there, right? Just be there. And so we're trying to build those things in them. And then there's practical ministry things that they do in the life of the church. And we debrief everything, every service, every meeting, everything that they do, so that there's this constant feedback. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of investment into them, before we end. But
really quick, one of the things that we've helped our church see, or we're trying to help them see, is this line item for pastoral development. It's actually part of our missions budget. Because we're trying to help them see, no, we're not just trying to build up these guys for how they can help us. This is our investment in what we hope that God will do in the world. So think of this, we are trying to give this and them a way to do God's work elsewhere.
That's awesome. So you're going to send them off with a lot of money too?
God graces.
This will be on camera. I'll make sure I send them to all of them.
Praise God. If God graces.
If God graces. If the Lord wills.
If the Lord wills.
I love that. Right. I love that. But I guess what I'm saying, like, the idea of so much investment, we've talked to you all the time. It's like, I never forget the day, like, I went to your office and he was like, John is not here anymore. And after doing 9 years of being together and having that, I mean, it's like, what J.D. Greer talks about is gospel goodbyes. How hard is that? I mean, you leaving your church that you pastored for so long, us ministering together and go start news. Like this idea of sending. I mean, I know church planting is, sexy and, and all the things, and, you get on stage like, hey, we send out all these guys and do all these things. But when it comes down to the actual relationships, and oftentimes, like for my church, with Blueprint, it's just like when you're about to send someone, it's like a funeral. Like people are not celebrating. People are like, why are we always saying goodbye? Can't we just keep everyone here? And it's just like the hardship and the heartache of it. Like, how do you guys process that, deal with that, in your own ministry?
Yeah, sending is costly and in a way that sometimes we don't expect, that relational aspect. You think of Paul going there to Miletus to meet the Ephesian elders, and it's just a tearful, broken-hearted goodbye, but it's worth it. They did it, and I think we have to kind of encourage ourselves in the Lord in that, and remember that Christ's kingdom is far bigger than any one local church, and as committed as we are to our local church, we're more committed to the capital C global church, and saying, we want this kingdom to win more than we want our kingdom to win. And that's going to require sacrifice on our part. The other thing is that I remember saying this in a variety of contexts. For believers, it never really is goodbye. It's see you later.
Right.
And that might sound like trite, but we have to take the long view of history when it comes to sending and say, man, we will have, when we've been there 10,000 years, we've no less days to sing God's praise.
Right.
Like, we will be forever together in perfect fellowship and harmony and known as we are known. And so I think, don't forget that we are living in chapter 4 of the story.
Yeah.
And chapter 50 is coming. The
Right.
final story is coming. And that, I think, enables us, in spite of the hardship, to send, even though it costs us greatly.
That's good. I was with you. I hope we don't have 45
Right.
But amen.
Those
amen.
were arbitrary.
Yeah.
Nah, but I think that just to that point and to your point, it does feel like a funeral. Like, I remember, our last day, like at Blueprint, and just seeing, the people there that we had spent years with, like not just the 6 years that we spent at that church, but being able to look out and to see, oh, no, this goes back 4 more years prior to this, in those 10 years, and saying goodbye. No, we're just going to be 5 miles up the road, but regardless of our best attempts, and now we're still going to hang out, we're still going to do that. We just know that that's not going to take place. And I do think it feels like a funeral, and we have to be prepared to use that. But to say Christian funerals are different.
Yeah.
First Thessalonians 4, right? Paul says, we grieve those that have actually died. But then he says, but we don't really grieve like the rest of the world, as those that don't have hope. And so it is a funeral, but it's that, sorrow mixed with rejoicing. And we rejoice in the Lord, and we're grateful for times that we get to do things like this, and like, oh man, I wish that we did this more. I wish that we got a chance to think more. But then we go back to work and do what God has called us to do, and trust that one day, like, the work will be over and we will be completely at rest and get a chance to enjoy and talk about the great things that God has done.
Amen.
I think just kind of a sidebar in there is, any church that is interested in multiplying, man, care for the wife and kids of those folks that you send out, because for them, sometimes it's even harder.
Yeah.
I remember when we landed at Blueprint, and man, I was there, and Dhati and I formed a relationship really quick. And so, like, I had that community almost instantaneously. But my wife and kids, it was a longer process for them. And I've just been conscious of that. Like, man, as you send, care for those families of the planter or the missionary or the pastor, and remember that, man, they're part of God's kingdom too, and they're part of the family. So really, it's wise and godly pastoring to take care of the whole family, not just the guy that you're sending out.
Amen.
Man, that's good. I appreciate getting time with y'all.
That's it.